This is Chuck at Lazarus Recovery Podcast at the junction of faith and recovery. And this is my first podcast after all the great adventures. So it's sort of the adventure podcast. And I am going to tell the story about my adventure and what I learned and what I didn't learn from all of that. I went in for a hernia operation and they gave me a bunch of stuff to try to help with the anticoagulant I took for my AFib. And well, apparently what happened was the anticoagulant allowed bleeds to happen in my head. So I came out of the thing, covered for the operation, and I don't know that I had a problem then, but then all of a sudden they said I had a bleed, and they went in and drilled my head to relieve the pressure from the bleed in my head. That was a little weird. And then I recovered from the operation and did the thing, and then I lose track of this stuff. My kids, I came back from taking my son to the airport, and then the next day I sounded weirder and weirder, and that was, they took me to the hospital, and then it was just downhill from there. It was just bad downhill from there. And I ended up, I lose track. Mostly I was dreaming during all of this. I don't know whether the dreams were real or it was sort of what happened, but not really accurately. Eventually, things went from bad to worse. The bleed got worse, and then a clot, as clots do, migrated to my lungs, and that stuff can kill you. And they put me on intubated me and put me on a thing, and I don't know how long I was on intubation, a week, something like that, some time. And they told my kids, it's like, this is not good. People die from this. And we had a lot of people praying, apparently. I was completely out of it. I was dreaming or doing whatever. I was out of it. And my daughter and my son got a hold of everybody we'd ever gone to church with. And we'd gone to a lot of church, and we had a lot of close friends. And they put us in touch with other prayer warriors. And, I think I was intubated. I lose track. A week, something like a days, a week, I don't know. But then I started to turn around. Things started to get better. They were afraid I was going to die. But then with prayer, things started to turn around. And I was in the hospital quite a while. But then I wasn't conscious really. They transferred me over to a rehab center. They have an intensive part of rehab center, and they have a non-intensive care. I was in intensive care for quite a while, taking blood, doing the thing, managing my meds, and they were praying because it was looking like I might be a vegetable. And my daughter was terrified. My son was terrified. They were praying. And I came out of it. I was dreaming all during this time. I was dreaming a lot during this time. I was just, I was a wreck. But I was dreaming. I had a dream life during this time. And I don't know whether it's worth it talking about the dreams, but I just dreamed all sorts of crazy stuff. But my daughter was praying. They were thinking I was going to be I'd survive but be a vegetable. But I wasn't a vegetable when I came out. I started dreaming and praying in tongues and doing all sorts of stuff, and I came to, and my brain was foggy but intact. With a little prompting, I knew who my name was, when my birthday was. And I answered those questions over and over and over again. What's your name? What's your birthday? Hold your hands out. All my reflexes were good. My strength was good. And the doctors were like, whoa. Because they really didn't know whether I was going to be a vegetable or not after all the things. I mean, they drilled holes in my head a couple times. They intubated me for a period of time. I was really viciously sick for extended period of time. CT scans showed blood in my brain. It was bad, and I didn't know half of what was going on. It's just that I knew the food sucked, and I knew that I was being driven nuts. But finally, somewhere along the line, I was awake to realize that my daughter came, my son came, and they told me the story, and I told them the story of what I was dreaming, and I was returning to a state of betterness, but imprisonment. I was imprisoned on a hospital bed. Survived on Ucky food. I didn't eat much, but I survived on Ucky food and Weather Channel. I spent a lot of time watching the Weather Channel, heat and tornadoes and the reality show stuff of truckers in Canada hauling trucks out of ditches and stuff like that. I loved it. I just absolutely loved it. So I spent quite a bit of time there. I don't know. It seemed like 5 years, but it was probably a month or two. And they moved me to a less critical, more exercise-oriented place, and I just continued to get better enough, and finally they let me come home. But I came home and I found out just how crazy it was. So continued, up to this day, continued doctor visits, continued debates about how best to treat the complicated bleeding issues in my brain. But the intellect is pretty much there. I mean, I was never a star intellect, but, I can do this. It's a little disjointed, but I can do this. And this is what I wanted to do in the hospital, is I wanted to get back to doing podcasts. And I'm utterly grateful that I can do this, utterly grateful. But one of the things in the take-home lessons, I'm still recovering, I'm still exercising, I'm still have to use a cane. I just started driving again. But what I'm so grateful for is that, I had a recording of gospel hymns that I had on my tablet. I had my daughter bring the tablet. I just plugged that sucker into the power, and I'd lay in the hospital bed, hurting, and played that lasted about an hour and a half. And I just listened to that and cried. Just cried. It was like my heart burnt. It was the weirdest experience. My heart burnt. But it felt like it was burning as I listened to the things and sung along with them. I don't sing good, but I sung along. And I wept and I cried. And I realized that what this first thing was about, this first podcast, if I got a chance, was going to be about no compromise. I wasn't going to compromise my faith or my adherence to the faith or my trust in the Lord or anything like that, because he had been so faithful. I mean, I'm 77, and I was one sick son of a gun. My legs were, at the worst, were deep gray, pasty deep gray. I wasn't eating, so I dropped 40 pounds, 45 pounds at the worst. I was weak as water when I first got up to do PT. And I was confused, and I was hurt, and I was messed up, really messed up. And, all I knew was listening to that music was that, and the kids telling me, Dad, we just went to the prayer warriors and we prayed and prayed hard, and you started to come around. It was during that time that I started dreaming dreams and weeping and praying in tongues and waking up. And I have no other explanation that God, through the prayer warriors, called me back. And what am I supposed to do with that? Decide that I'm not going to say the stuff I say? No, I'll say the stuff I say. And if you don't like it, you can just not listen. But I am not going to compromise what I say about the Lord. I'll change if I'm being stupid, which I do that a lot. But I'm not going to change my understanding of who he is and what he is and what he does and what he means for people. And I think that that's the reason I get so much grief, is because he is scary powerful. And his authority is unquestioned in spiritual realms anyway. Here you get a little flack because you got W Devil broadcasting all the time. But he is all powerful. And I will make no compromise at all over the fact that Jesus is Lord and King over the affairs of men, and that it is his decision alone where we go after we die. His decision alone. And he died so people could be forgiven. But the condition is, if we confess our sins and believe in him and make him Lord, in other words, we obey him as best we can, then we will be in good state with him and we'll be brought to heaven. A little bit of a transition for some of us, because it ain't earth there, it's heaven. It's holiness and righteousness and glory and peace and all those things. Bit of a transition for some of us, but definitely better than what the Bible says other people go, and it's Jesus who gets to say, depart from me, all you evil work doers. So Jesus is the one that has to say every human being. And that's a little bit hard to deal with, but it is what it is. And this first podcast is about no compromise. I was dead and now I'm alive. My kids were told when I was intubated that he's old, he's weak, he's not doing good, his blood chemistry is crap, if he stays alive, he might be a vegetable. And they went on their face, and they got everybody else to get on their face. And I came out of it. Okay. I mean, not impaired. Okay. And the doctor would come in every day and say, this is amazing. He'd just shake his head and say, this is amazing. What are you doing? You should be, you shouldn't be this way. I mean, I wasn't a happy camper and I wasn't eating, but I could talk. I could make myself known. I could conduct intelligent conversations. And that wasn't supposed to happen at all. And what happened was the doctors were good, but they didn't think there was much of a chance. But my daughter and my son and all the people from all the churches that we were close with, they prayed, and God answered their prayer. So it's not magic or humbug or, occult practices or anything else. All my people that prayed were Jesus following believers, and they prayed. And I'm here because they prayed. And I believe that I'm supposed to do what I'm doing, and that's this. Does anybody listen? Probably not. But this is what I do from now on. And I woke up and came to and said, well, with all the craziness of the house getting wrecked and our money getting drained away and squeezed out and just the tumult of our lives since I started the podcast, I said, I'm not going to compromise. I'm going to say what I say. And if the only person that can change me is the Lord. He says, you're not doing it right, and I'll change and tell you I screwed it up. But at this point, I don't believe I screwed it up in the sense that I've told everybody that listens that Jesus is Lord and King. And our fate in the eternal is with Jesus. And I try to make that understood to people in recovery because they're my number one thing. I'm a recovery person. So that's sort of the, hi, I'm back. Anyway, thank you for listening if you listen. And this is Chuck at Last Discovery Podcast at the junction of faith and recovery. And the next one will be, I don't know, but it'll be what it is, not what I feel is appropriate to do to make people happy, because I was dead and now I'm alive. This is Chuck at Lazarus Recovery Podcast, the junction of faith and recovery. Thank you very much.